Nothing in that mansion ever happened by accident. Every room sparkled with polished marble, every hallway echoed power, and every object radiated the tension of a family hiding more secrets than wealth. But on that particular afternoon, within the elegant main hall where chandeliers glowed like frozen stars, a single word escaped a young man's mouth and shattered the entire structure of lies his father had spent decades building. He called the cleaner mother. The staff froze. The security guards turned sharply. Even the billionaire himself, an Indian magnate known for his temper, his empire, and his need to control every narrative, stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened with a fear no one had ever seen inside him, because he knew, in that instant, that the truth he worked so violently to bury had finally clawed its way to the surface. The cleaner, meanwhile, dropped the tray she was carrying. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall like a verdict. Her hands trembled not from guilt, but from the shock of hearing a word she had forbidden herself to even imagine again. She had spent her entire life hiding in plain sight, raising a boy who never knew he was hers, watching him grow into wealth that would never belong to her, cleaning the floors of a house that once stole everything from her. And now, the truth had chosen its moment. The billionaire's son stared at her with an expression that held confusion, longing, and instinct. Deep, primal instinct. Something inside him had spoken before his mind could stop it. He didn't know why he said it. He didn't know where the familiarity came from, but the way she looked at him, the tremble in her lips, the restrained pain in her eyes, answered a question he didn't even know he had been asking his whole life. Silence spread across the mansion like wildfire. The billionaire stepped forward, his voice shaking with a rage that barely hid his panic. He demanded the boy apologize. He demanded the cleaner deny it. He demanded the staff forget what they heard. But none of them could erase the moment that had just unfolded. None of them could unhear the word that cut deeper than any scandal. And for the first time in years, the cleaner lifted her head, not as an employee, not as a servant, not as a woman forced into invisibility, but as someone who stood at the edge of a truth she had been forced to bury. Her eyes met the billionaire's, and he knew she wasn't going to lie this time. The fall of a lie. When one word destroys an empire of secrets. The mansion had weathered decades of scandals, political storms, hostile takeovers, and enemies disguised as allies. Yet it had never trembled the way it trembled when one single word left the young man's lips. A word that didn't belong in that house. A word that had been buried under threats, silenced with wealth, erased with intimidation. But the truth doesn't stay dead forever. And that afternoon it rose with the innocence of a son calling a woman he barely knew mother. The billionaire felt the ground vanish beneath him. For years, he controlled every detail of that household with an iron fist. Every servant knew their place. Every rumor was crushed. Every trace of the past was erased. Nothing survived his authority. Not friendships, not mistakes, not inconvenient truths. But he had forgotten the one variable he could never control. Instinct. The instinct of a child recognizing the person who once held him in her arms. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Instead of strength, the room heard fear. And fear, coming from a man like him, was more shocking than the truth itself. The cleaner stood motionless. Her body wanted to run, but her soul refused. She had swallowed her reality for so long, it had become part of her bones. She had mopped the floors where her son learned to walk. She had washed the clothes he wore to his first school. She had dusted the shelves where his childhood trophies stood. She had lived in the shadows of his life, forbidden to speak a truth that burned inside her every day. And now, with one instinctive word, everything she had been forced to hide came crashing into the open. The billionaire's son blinked, confused. He didn't understand the reaction yet, but he felt something deep in his chest, a strange warmth, a familiarity he had felt around the cleaner many times without knowing why. There were moments in his childhood when he gravitated toward her, drawn by something invisible. Moments when her voice soothed him more than the expensive tutors his father hired. Moments when her presence felt safe in a way he couldn't explain. The billionaire's voice snapped through the room like a whip. He ordered his son to apologize. He ordered the cleaner to correct him. He ordered the staff to return to work, but none of them moved. Everyone felt the tension thickening. The truth was too heavy to obey commands. The cleaner finally exhaled. Her breath shook as if she'd been drowning for years and only now surfaced. She looked at the billionaire with eyes that no longer feared him, eyes that remembered everything he had done, eyes that dared him to deny the truth in front of the boy whose life he manipulated since birth. The billionaire lunged toward her, lowering his voice to keep the staff from hearing. He hissed through clenched teeth, demanding she deny everything. He promised consequences. He threatened her job, her safety, her silence, but she didn't back away, not this time. The boy stepped between them, a small movement, but powerful enough to make the billionaire's heart stutter. His own son shielded the woman he tried to erase. The cleaner felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear, but from something she had never allowed herself to hope for: recognition. Even if unintentional, even if accidental, even if dangerous. And then the boy said something that made the billionaire's legs weaken. He asked her why calling her mother felt right. The billionaire snapped, shouting for him to stop, his voice echoing through the marble hallways. But shouting couldn't bury the truth anymore. Lies that survive decades tend to die loudly. The cleaner closed her eyes for a moment. For the first time, she seemed ready to speak, ready to break the chains that held her voice hostage for years. She opened her mouth, and the billionaire grabbed her arm. The staff gasped, the boy shouted, and the truth hovered in the air like a storm ready to break. If you want to keep hearing this story and don't want to miss the next twist, subscribe now. Your support helps this channel bring more powerful, emotional, dramatic stories that keep you hooked until the last second. The woman he tried to erase, and the truth that refused to die. The billionaire's grip tightened around her arm with a violence he had perfected over the years, a quiet, calculated brutality disguised beneath wealth and tailored suits. The staff had seen him angry. They had seen him dismissive, cold, unforgiving, but they had never seen him desperate, and desperation always exposes the kind of man someone truly is. The cleaner didn't recoil. She didn't flinch. She had endured far worse than a hand on her arm. She had survived humiliation in this very house. She had swallowed years of silence for the sake of a boy she could not claim. She had been threatened, cornered, erased. But the moment his fingers dug into her skin, something inside her that had been dormant for too long finally awakened. The billionaire's son stepped forward again, faster this time, instinct overriding obedience. His voice cracked with panic as he shouted for his father to let her go. The assistant stared in shock, unable to process the sight. The heir of a billionaire protecting a cleaner in front of the entire household. Staff members exchanged looks, realizing that whatever truth was about to surface had been boiling beneath the surface long before this moment. The billionaire released her abruptly, not out of mercy, but because he realized the eyes watching him were not afraid anymore. Fear had shifted. It was no longer in the staff, no longer in the cleaner. It was in him. He pointed a trembling finger at her and demanded she deny everything. He ordered her to call the boy Sir, to apologize, to restore the hierarchy he depended on. But his voice cracked mid-command, and everyone heard it. The man who barked orders with unshakable authority now sounded like someone begging a secret not to betray him. The cleaner rubbed her arm where he had grabbed her. Her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with the weight of a truth she had carried alone for far too long. She had lived in this mansion for more than a decade, tending to rooms she once dreamed of calling home. She had watched the boy grow, watched him smile, cry, stumble, succeed. She had held him while he slept during storms, comforted him when nightmares shattered his rest, and wiped away tears he didn't want the world to see. She was his mother in everything except name. And now the name was demanding to be spoken. She opened her mouth to answer the question he had asked moments earlier. Why did calling you mother feel right? But before she could speak, memories slammed into her. Memories she fought to bury. Memories of the night she was pushed out of this house. Memories of being told her presence was a threat to the family's image. Memories of being forced to give up her own child so the billionaire's reputation would remain immaculate. She took a shaky breath. The boy watched her as if his entire identity depended on her next word. The billionaire watched her as if his entire empire depended on her silence. She began to speak, but the billionaire roared over her voice, shouting for security. Staff members flinched, but no one moved. Security guards exchanged uncertain glances. Something in the cleaner's posture, something in the boy's stance, told them that stepping in would put them on the wrong side of history. The billionaire's son looked at him and said something that sliced through the mansion's silence. Why are you so scared of her speaking? That question didn't just expose panic, it exposed guilt. The billionaire's jaw clenched. For a moment, he looked like a man drowning in the very wealth he used to float above everyone else. His eyes darted between the cleaner and the boy, calculating his next lie. But lies that grow in the dark never survive the light. The cleaner lifted her chin and spoke softly. Softly enough that everyone leaned in, but strongly enough that the billionaire's body stiffened. You took my son from me once. You will not silence me again. The boy's breath caught. The staff gasped. One maid covered her mouth. A guard dropped his radio. The billionaire stumbled backward, the truth hitting him like a force he had feared for years. And the young heir looked at the cleaner with eyes that understood everything in a single heartbeat. If you want the next chapter of this story and don't want to miss the upcoming twists, subscribe now. Your support keeps this series alive and helps bring more emotional, dramatic, gripping stories to the channel. The Son's Awakening. When blood speaks louder than power. The words hung in the air like a detonation. You took my son from me once. You will not silence me again. The entire mansion froze. The polished floors, the tall windows, the marble pillars, everything that symbolized status and control felt suddenly too small to contain the magnitude of what had just been revealed. The billionaire's son stood unmoving, as if time had wrapped itself around him and refused to let go. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. His chest tightened. Something deep, ancient, instinctive stirred inside him. A truth he had always felt but never understood now roared to life. The cleaner, the woman he had dismissed as background, the woman his father treated like a disposable shadow, was looking at him with the kind of pain only a mother carries. He took a slow step toward her. The billionaire stepped in front of him like a wall. No, the father growled, his voice low, trembling with a fear he could no longer disguise. You don't speak to her. You don't listen to her. You don't believe. But the boy interrupted him, voice cracking with a strength that surprised even him. Why are you so afraid of me listening? That question ruptured something in the billionaire's chest. His pupils constricted. His jaw twitched. And for the first time in the boy's life, he saw his father as something other than invincible. He saw weakness, panic, guilt. The kind of guilt that can only come from a truth long buried. The staff watched silently, some trembling, some crying, some finally understanding the strange tension that had always lived between the billionaire and the cleaner. The boy sidestepped his father, determination replacing confusion. He moved toward the cleaner, each step heavy with 1,000 questions that had haunted him for years. Why did he always feel drawn to her? Why did her voice calm him in ways no one else's could? Why did her absence hurt him more than the absence of anyone else? Why did he feel seen when she looked at him? He stopped in front of her. His voice softened. "Is it true?" Her breath hitched. She hadn't allowed herself to imagine this moment. She had lived a lifetime believing she would die with her truth buried. But now, with her son standing in front of her, pleading for the truth his father kept hidden, she couldn't run anymore. She couldn't lie. She couldn't protect the man who stole everything from her, not at the cost of losing her son again. She nodded. The billionaire exploded. He lunged toward her, but 2 security guards instinctively stepped in front of him, not because they believed her story yet, but because the billionaire's rage no longer looked like leadership. It looked like danger. He barked orders at them, threatened their jobs, their families, their lives, but they didn't move. They had never seen him lose control like this. His mask of power had cracked too deeply to be repaired in front of witnesses. The cleaner spoke again, her voice quiet but unbreakable. "He was mine before he was ever yours." The billionaire shouted for silence, his voice echoing off the marble. He questioned her sanity, her motives, her dignity. He called her manipulative, delusional, dangerous. But every accusation only revealed what he feared most. The truth was no longer something he could kill with money. Finally, the boy snapped. "Enough!" His voice shook the entire hall. Everyone turned. He looked at the cleaner with eyes full of emotion. "How? How did this happen? Why didn't you ever tell me?" The cleaner looked down, tears threatening to fall, but refusing to break the surface. "I wasn't allowed to," she whispered. "He made sure of it." The billionaire's fists clenched. The boy's face collapsed in horror. She continued, voice cracking. "You were taken from me. I wasn't a danger to you. I was a danger to his reputation." The boy stared at his father, really stared at him for the first time. And in that moment, he didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see a provider. He didn't see a father. He saw a thief of truth, of love, of identity. He whispered, broken, You hid my mother from me?" The billionaire could not answer, because everyone in that room already knew the answer. If you want the next chapter of this story, and don't want to miss what happens when the father's lies collapse and the son chooses a side, subscribe now. Your support keeps these powerful, emotional stories coming. The confession that could not be stopped, when a mother reclaims her son. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield, one where truth had finally breached the gates and demanded to be heard. The billionaire's son stood frozen between 2 worlds, the golden prison built by his father, and the raw, trembling truth standing in front of him, dressed in a cleaner's uniform. A truth that had a heartbeat. A truth that had eyes full of memories he never knew were his. A truth that had arms that once held him before being forced to let go. He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and recognition, as if some part of his soul had finally found what it had been searching for, without knowing it. She saw it, she felt it. The invisible thread that had always connected them finally tightened, refusing to be denied any longer. The billionaire stepped forward in a panic, his voice cracking like glass under pressure. "Don't say another word," he hissed. Not at her, but at his son. He wasn't trying to protect him. He was trying to protect himself. The son took one step back from him. Forgetting about business empires, family names, and inherited power, he spoke with a clarity that came from a place deeper than blood. "I deserve to know the truth." The cleaner swallowed hard. She had dreamed of this moment, feared it, begged for it, and believed it would never come. So she stepped toward him, her hands shaking, not from fear of the billionaire, but from the emotional weight of standing so close to the child she carried, the child she lost, the child she spent a lifetime cleaning around rather than holding. The billionaire's face twisted with desperation. He shouted for the staff to leave. No one moved. He demanded the guards remove her. They didn't step forward. He ordered his son to follow him, but the young man didn't even turn his head. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of disappointing his father. He was afraid of losing the truth. The cleaner spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It didn't waver. She began with the words that had been locked inside her for years. You were born into this house, but you were not born into love. The room tightened. The son's breath shook. She told him about the early days, how she cared for him when his biological mother died unexpectedly, how the billionaire found himself incapable of dealing with a newborn, how he handed the boy to the one woman in the mansion who had enough heart to raise a child with tenderness and patience. She told him how she fed him, rocked him, protected him from the storms of grief and wealth that tore through the house. She told him how he clung to her clothes, how he learned his first words in her arms, how he looked for her before anyone else when he woke up crying. She told him how she was the only constant warmth in a home where everything else was cold. And then she told him the part she had tried to forget. When the boy turned 3, the billionaire saw the bond forming, saw the affection, saw the way the child chose her over him. He couldn't tolerate the idea that a cleaner meant more to his son than he did. He feared the judgment of society, the whispers of his elite circle, the stain on his image. So he tore them apart. She described the night she was dragged out of the nursery, sobbing, forbidden to comfort him as he cried for her, forbidden to speak her truth, forbidden to claim the child she had raised like her own, forbidden to be the mother she already was. The son's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't wipe them. He wasn't ashamed. He was devastated. He turned to his father, searching for denial, any shred of hope that this wasn't true. But the billionaire looked away, and that was all the confirmation he needed. The son whispered, voice breaking, "You stole her from me." The billionaire exploded, "I gave you everything." But the boy roared back, "Except the one person who loved me." The billionaire staggered as if struck. The cleaner lowered her head, the truth heavy but finally spoken. For the first time in that mansion's history, the lies had lost. If you want the next chapter, when the billionaire faces the consequences of his biggest sin and the son chooses who he truly belongs to, subscribe now. Your support keeps these dramatic and emotional stories alive. The collapse of a tyrant. When a son chooses truth over blood, the billionaire had survived hostile takeovers, political betrayals, market crashes, and enemies with enough power to crush an empire. But nothing prepared him for the moment. His own son stepped away from him and stood beside the woman he tried to erase. All the wealth in the mansion couldn't shield him. All the influence he'd built couldn't silence what was unfolding. For the first time in decades, he was no longer the most powerful man in the room. The son's breathing came uneven, but his voice was steady as he faced his father. "Why did you hide her from me?" The billionaire opened his mouth, searching for a lie, a justification, anything that would restore the hierarchy he lived for. But there was nothing left to stand on. Every lie had collapsed. Every excuse disintegrated in the presence of truth. He tried anyway. "I did it to protect you." The cleaner stepped forward, her voice cutting through his words. "No, you did it to protect your reputation." The son closed his eyes, her sentence hitting him harder than any blow. He turned his back on his father for the first time, and the billionaire's world cracked like breaking stone. He wasn't losing a debate. He was losing his legacy. The cleaner spoke again, not in anger, but with the heartbreaking calm of someone who carried wounds older than the man standing in front of her. "I wasn't allowed to hold him when he cried for me. I wasn't allowed to comfort him when he shook with nightmares. And you watched me walk away from the child I raised. You watched him scream my name, and you told the staff to stay silent. Her voice trembled. The boy's knees almost buckled under the weight of her confession. The staff, who had once lived under the billionaire's control, now looked at him with disgust, with judgment, with the silent acknowledgement that power means nothing when truth steps into the light. The billionaire tried one last time to regain ground. It was for his future, for his name. You were a... He didn't finish, because the sun stepped between them, eyes blazing. If you call her anything less than my mother again, I will walk out that door and never come back. The billionaire froze. That was the one threat he could not endure. Not investors, not enemies. Losing his son would be the death of everything he built. He tried to reach for him, but the boy stepped away. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. He tried to control the narrative, but the narrative no longer belonged to him. The cleaner looked at her son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The little boy she lost was now a grown man standing tall in front of her, defending her with a fierceness she had only ever dreamed of. Her tears finally escaped, tracing silent lines down her cheeks. The son walked toward her slowly. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of himself he never knew was missing. When he reached her, he did the unthinkable. He hugged her. The mansion erupted in stunned silence. She hesitated for a single heartbeat, years of fear still haunting her muscles. Then she wrapped her arms around him, holding her son for the first time in over a decade. The billionaire took one step forward, but the look on his son's face stopped him cold. "This is my mother." He said it with conviction, with pride, with a certainty that shattered every lie the billionaire had crafted about lineage, image, and legacy. The billionaire stumbled backward, unable to breathe, unable to speak. His empire hadn't fallen because of competitors, scandals, or enemies. It fell because the truth he tried to bury had risen in the form of a son reclaiming his identity. The staff began to whisper. Some cried, some nodded, some looked relieved that the truth had finally been spoken aloud. The cleaner, still holding her son, whispered something so soft only he could hear. "I never stopped loving you." The boy closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I always felt you," he answered. "I just didn't know why." And with that, the mansion, built on lies, ego, and stolen motherhood, finally broke. If this story moved you, if this truth hit you deeply, share this video and like it now. It helps YouTube understand that this channel brings emotional storytelling, reflection, and meaning into a world that desperately needs more humanity.